All right, so in this video, we're going to start getting into some of the good stuff. We're going to start talking about melee and overrun resolution. Now, just in case you don't know, what that means is either a unit or a armored fighting vehicle getting involved in close hand-to-hand combat, or in the case of an armored fighting vehicle, trying to run over your opponent. These are both handled fairly much the same way, so we're going to talk about both as we go over this. Since there are a few more steps to resolving this, though, I'm probably going to end up breaking this video into multiple parts so we can get into the specifics. Now, one of the things when it comes to melees and overruns is the fact that they're initiated during the player's impulse, but they're not going to be fully resolved until that player's following upkeep phase. This is what we talked about before in some of the earlier videos. The things like movement, you'll start at one point, but then you'll finish it during that upkeep phase. Melees and overruns are the same principle. Also, when it comes to the overruns themselves, they cannot be conducted into blocking terrain. They can be conducted into degrading terrain and obviously clear terrain. But if it's degrading with a potential bog check, you will resolve that bog check that we talked about previously after all of the overrun aspects have been resolved. So when you do select a unit to conduct a melee, you will take a counter and you will place it on them, signifying where that melee is going to take place. We'll say our infantry squad is attacking the SS squad. Now, when conducting the melees and the overruns, yes, you can have multiple, so you could have multiple infantry squads conducting a melee, but you can't do a combination melee and overrun. So you can't have the infantry squad trying to do their melee and this tank trying to overrun the SS squad at the same time. You're going to do either or. So like I said, you're going to resolve this during the upkeep phase of the initiating player, right? They're following upkeep phase. And that's only if the unit that is conducting the melee survives. So if something were to happen in a previous impulse that killed him, obviously, then he's not going to be conducting that melee. If, however, he became shaken instead, he would still conduct that melee attack. So the way that melees work is you're looking for a number of D6 checks, and that's going to come down to the firepower of the units involved, which again is this little red number here in the bottom, and any modifiers that are going to affect that firepower. So what I mean by that is you're going to conduct a number of D6 checks for each firepower of the units conducting the attack. And since we've just got one here in our example, this infantry squad would have a firepower of 1. The SS squad would have a firepower of 2. So they would get 2 D6 checks. The infantry squad would get a single. Now, we haven't looked at any modifiers yet. And just to show you guys here real quick, there is a list of potential modifiers for melees and overruns. And this comes to whether the units are shaken in types of terrain. Also keep in mind that if the units have support weapons, they can add those firepower factors into their D6 checks. And you see that it will add plus 1d6, plus 2d6, just depending on whether or not the modifier helps you or hurts you. And it'll show you attacker and then defender. So you're going to look for all of these modifiers and then add them or subtract them from the units accordingly. Something to keep in mind with this too, though, is that your defending units D6 checks cannot go under 1. So no matter how many negatives they end up having applied to them, they will at least have a single check. Okay, so what am I talking about when I'm saying these D6 checks? What I simply mean is with your action cards, you'll draw and you'll flip and you're looking for that number. And what you're looking for here is the number 4. Okay, so anything 4 above is a success when you're conducting these D6 checks. So calculate all your modifiers, right, that apply, add them or subtract them from your firepower factors for the units involved, and that will give you a total number of D6 checks that we have going. So here, I don't think there's any modifiers, but we're going to say there are no modifiers affecting it. We would have 2d6 checks for our SS squad, 1d6 check for our infantry squad here. And they would each draw cards looking for a number of 4 or higher to have a success. Now, something that does come into play with our SS squad here is if you look at their melee symbol right here at the top, it might be hard to see, but I'll throw it up here in the corner as well. You see there's a very small +1 underneath that. That's something that you have to keep an eyeball out for, because that means they get a modifier to these checks, all right? So this doesn't give them an extra check. What this does is add a +1 to the checks that they made. So just drawing 2 random cards here at the top of our deck, they would actually have 2 successes with these 2 cards drawn, because 5 is higher than 4, so this is an automatic success. 3 would normally be a failure, but since they get a +1 innately, they have higher melee skills, that bumps that to a 4, so they would have 2 successes. All right, so we will pick up in the next video with the resolution of what you do once you have conducted this and you know the number of successes for each your attackers and your defenders.